Hey.
What's happening out here today?
Well, it's another update on the 8N. Last week, I think this was set up. I had the cooling system set up, but I didn't have anything over here as far as control linkages go. I rebuilt the governor completely internally. It has all new bearings. It's been set back to spec. It's got new fly ball bearings in it too. And the governor actually works pretty well. This is the governor down here. The linkage is a little sloppy. You can see there's a little bit of play before the spring really gets its tension, but it's not that big of a deal. So a couple of the things I've been working on are the governor. The carburetor started leaking. It's not leaking right now, but just give it, it will, I'm sure. It didn't leak for an entire week, and then I went over and I've already had the carburetor apart 3 times, so I'm just going to have to get a rebuild kit for it. The float just intermittently doesn't seat. So governor's on, linkages is in there, linkages are on, and then my inductive tachometer was giving me all kinds of funky readings. I had it wrapped around a spark plug wire, and it would read 1500, and then it would read 1900, and then it would read 1100, and then it would just fluctuate all around. So I got a laser tack, and so what we'll do is we'll go and check the output speed of the PTO shaft, multiply that by 2.75, and that gives us engine RPM, so we can determine where the engine's actually sitting. Okay, so let's fire it up, and we'll do that quick test. This should be pretty simple. Fires right up. It smokes like crazy though, like really bad. You said it was a little smoky. It's more than a little smoky. So if you want to come back here, I'll slow this down a little bit so you can see it. If you look at the PTO shaft back here, I spray painted it black and put a reflective strip on it so that the tachometer will be able to pick it up. This is a cheap little Amazon tachometer. Reads up to like 99,000 RPM or something crazy. I'll never use it for. So you can see, stored in memory, it's 582, 543. It does a memory of max, minimum, and final values. So that should be the speed that the PTO turns for most implements, around 540 RPM. So where the engine's at now is it's just idling. So we'll just test where it's at idle. So the idle is set a little bit high. We're getting about, there we go. Yeah, it's about 300 RPM. So we'll go ahead and there's the smoke. Let's see where it's at now. That's about 400. All right. There's about PTO RPM, so that should be 1500 engine RPM, just about. Which is about right. And then if you go full throttle, told you. We're at about 775-ish. So it's about in the range. It should be governed at about 2,000 to 2,200 RPM engine speed. So we're looking pretty good. As far as setting the governor and making sure that the engine's not over speeding, the idle's a little high, but I'm totally fine with that because it runs nice and smooth here. The problem is, come over here and take a look. This thing is just, the more I run it, the more it leaks. So now I've got a leak coming out of one of the head bolts. And what's a little more concerning is if you look right under here, it's really hard to see, but there's actually a crack in the block right there. It's a tiny little hairline crack, but as the system builds a little bit of pressure and it gets nice and hot, you can see water running out of that crack there. And if you look below it right here, you like that repair? That should have been a Welch plug, like a casting plug. And somebody put in a bolt and cut the head off of it. JB welded it in there. So, I mean, that repair is actually holding, so it's not a big deal. And in fact, I wasn't going to mess with any of the head or any of the cooling system. I haven't flushed it or anything because I was worried if I flushed it, all that debris would get pulled out of there and then it would start leaking. So I haven't even touched it. I just put some distilled water in it. And like I said, the more I run it, the more it leaks. So there's a leak there. There's a leak here. I don't know if you can see this. There's a really decent leak coming from the front crank seal. Yeah, you can see that line that runs down through here. That would be, yeah. So what if you look down there? That's just in the time that we've been sitting here. So it's pretty bad. So it continues to develop more leaks. It's an old engine, and I am super critical about not having leaks. So this is just driving me nuts. Every time I fix one leak, something else pops up. I fixed one leak for good, and that was over here on this side of the tractor. If you want to come take a look at it, right here. Put a new exhaust clamp on and reseated the pipe to the manifold, and so it doesn't leak there anymore. You can't even feel the pulses. It was just billowing smoke out of there. So that's most of the engine-related stuff. I went ahead and cleaned up some of the wiring in here. You can see some of the wiring that goes from the alternator, from this tube over to the alternator, is now secured on the back side right here. I found a little bolt and a strap and tied the wire in there to keep it away from the exhaust manifold. And then on the ignition coil side, if you come up over here, I put a new lead, heat shrink lead going to the coil, so she's all good there. As far as the ignition system goes, I did replace the coil because the other one was shot. It would run on a bench under really, really good voltage. Like, it'd have to be like 13 volts for it to really do anything. This one, you can actually, on the last coil, I had to release the starter to get the spark to generate. So anytime I tried to start the engine, I'd hold down the starter button and then release it, and then the engine would fire. This one is not like that. This one you can actually hold down the starter button, and even though the voltage drops, it still can create enough spark. So that's most of what's been going on engine-wise. The transmission fluid, I've never really talked about it, but based upon the sludge that I had pulled out before, this looks pretty good. I mean, you can probably barely even see it. I mean, I was pulling out mud, like chunks of mud with my hand, which I'm sure there's still some in there, but the hydraulics do work. They bleed off a little bit. They leak internally, and if I can't see the leak, then I'm fine with it. It's fine. So some painting was done. That was done. Now I realize that I've got to get some more engine-related parts. I've got to get a carburetor rebuild kit. I've got to get a head gasket that's decent because the one that shipped was damaged in shipping. Get some new head bolts, seal that up. I'll probably do another JB Weld repair right above that one on the block. Might as well. They don't build a lot of system pressure. I mean, as long as it can seal a leak decently. I think they only build like 7 PSI, I think the cap is rated for, or something like that. It's less than an automotive system even. Over here, I went ahead and greased up all of the linkages for the three-point system, and noticed that things are just really worn out, man. I mean, like, there's a ton of slop and all this stuff. So it's going to need quite a bit of work. It'll be able to do some light-duty work right out of the gate, I'm sure. But with the condition of the motor being as it is, it's going to need a full rebuild. I mean, it'll need taken completely out, put on a stand, and done properly. which I'm disappointed in, but at the same time, I mean, I've done so much work on the external part of the engine, the only part I don't know and understand is the inside, and I do look forward to doing that at some point in time, just not right now, because this has been, I mean, this has been a month and a half, probably 2 months, I believe. I've been working on this, and I just want to get it done before winter. I want to get it done before the weather breaks. Come over here.
What'd you do?
I didn't really go over the electrical system very much, but everything in here was completely wire nutted. Actually, a wire nut would have been an upgrade from the type of wiring that was in here. I mean, it was barely twisted together, a little bit of electrical tape, and that's it. A wire nut would have been preferable. All of the switches were left out in the rain, so every single switch, I actually took them physically apart, cleaned the contacts, cleaned the sliding mechanisms, put them back together, and oddly enough, they all worked. The only one I wasn't going to take a chance with was the ignition switch, because if it fails, the tractor's just not going to run, so it got a new ignition switch. But headlights, which actually right now is it's a 3-position switch. So you have when you pull the switch all the way out, you get reverse lights and headlights. You put it in the middle position, you get headlights only, which of course we don't have headlights; they'd be over there.
Oh.
And then the first position is off. So I just want to show you, I do have a cool electrical thing working there. The ammeter does work, so you can tell. When you turn the switch here, you can see the needle bounce into the negative. So it's sensing the flow of electrons through there and seeing that it's pulling amps from the battery. So if it's charging, it's on this side. If it's discharging, it's on this side. And since we're connected to that coil, we're pulling in between 10 and 0, so we're pulling 4 amps just about. It's about what it should be pulling. So all of this stuff underneath here is new. Is rebuilt and or new. So this actually was new when I got the tractor, about the only thing. This is some weird aftermarket funky push button switch that's been put in there. When I did the wiring for the new switch for the headlights, what I did is I put in a 2-pin weatherproof connector, so when you put the hood on, you can just plug the headlights into the connector. You don't have to like fish the wiring out or try to get the wiring off of the switch. You can just plug it in and unplug it. So when that hood comes over here, I'll plug it in. And so it'll make removing the hood a little easier. I assume this is going to be the kind of project where the hood's got to come off like way more frequently than you would want it to. Really, it's designed to be, you know, like the hood is like a stationary thing, and you know, it doesn't hinge or anything. You've got a little opening in the top for an access door, but that's it. The battery was completely shot when I got it too, as far as electrical systems go.
Battery?
Yeah. So desulfated it and brought it back to life. It's working all right now. All new spark plug wires. So electrical system is pretty much new front to back, and or rebuilt in some fashion, because I don't take chances with that stuff. It's too easy to fix before it becomes an issue. So I always figure, well, even if you don't know, just do it. Just put a new connector on, put some new wiring in. It's not expensive, it's not difficult, and it saves you a ton of headaches in the long run. So, something I just forgot to mention before was the electrical system. That is it, I believe. So, the axle bushing was completely roached. The whole axle was flopping around so bad. This is the bushing I drove out of the axle. So the way this works is, this is the axle pin, and unfortunately the axle pin is also roached. The pin rides through the axle on this bushing, and there is no lubrication for that point. I read a couple things about why they decided not to lubricate it, and for whatever reason, it never receives lubrication, and it just completely got roached after, you know, 50, 60 years. So, new bushing to go in, need to get a new pin to go with the new bushing. So we'll go ahead and drive that guy in there. And, yeah, let's go into the shop real quick, and I'll show you the last couple parts, and I think that'll kind of round out the update. Oh, here. So this was completely taken apart and cleaned and then painted. Now this is like a terribly better than it was paint job. I mean, it's bad. Like, I just pressure washed it. I didn't use any kind of actual cleaning agents or sanding or anything like that. I just got the cruft off of it and put a coat of paint on it so it didn't rust and it looked a little better. So here's the 8N hood in the color that I mixed. And it doesn't look bad. From, you know, in certain light it doesn't look bad. Of course, it's all rusted through and everything. And then I went ahead and rewired the lights. They had Scotch locks for connectors on the lights. So if you come in here, you can check out. Ran heat shrink through there. Ran some nice long lengths of loom here so I can tie them up on both sides. Tried to get them somewhat symmetrical. I ran my ground through the hood. So what I went ahead and did is made sure that the hood had a good chassis ground there. So I cleaned up these areas here so when it bolts in, it gets a ground. And then found some 2-conductor wire and ran it through here. It's got a new sediment bowl on the tank. I didn't bother painting the tank because whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's not gonna see that much weather or wear in there. So there's the hood assembly, which is not going to go back on until that engine is not leaking profusely. There's no sense in putting this on, unfortunately, until that engine stops leaking. So what's left? Various gaskets. Oh, here's the, let me show you this. I posted an Amazon review of this, but this is how I received the head gasket for this tractor. You can see it from here. Can you see how distorted it is? I mean, that should be a flat surface, and that is anything but. It is completely crumpled into, like, right about there. Yeah. I mean, it's bad. Now, I watched a Cold War Motors video the other day where they fixed a bent head gasket. Just one port on the bent head gasket, like one coolant port. I'm kind of tempted to try to do it myself, even though this one's like way worse than the one that they dealt with. We'll see what happens. I'll probably spend 10-15 minutes on it. If it looks like I can save it, I'll save it. It's not like a head gasket on those engines is terribly difficult to do. It's all right there. You don't have to take anything off except the head and the bolts and a couple of the things on the side. So, various gaskets that are just extra at this point. Here's the axle support that I cleaned, and if you look, come over here in the light a little bit because you might be able to. I mean, there was like a pile of stuff just laying down in the bottom here. A mixture of rust and dirt and oil and all kinds of stuff. So this has been pressure washed, and although it doesn't look clean, it is much, much better than it was before. And yeah, shameless plug.
Better than it was.
Right. And if you look closely on the support bracket right here, you can see where the axle was actually wobbling back and forth and chewing into the surface. Like if you look at this surface here, there's really not much wear. Most of the wear was over here. But you can see how much of the material has actually been worn away by the axle bushing being bad. Which is why I'm not putting it back in until I have a new pin and a new bushing. So that's done. Here's pile O parts. These are all the things replaced. Cam gear, crank. Oh, actually, here is the whole reason that the tractor was bad, or that the tractor was bought as a bad unit. So, yeah, that was the cam gear. Yeah. This is the crank gear. There's the tooth that's missing. See it? It's got a missing tooth. This is what the oil pump pickup tube looked like. It was just laying down on the bottom of the pan. It had a cracked cover that someone graciously gave me.
That's very sweet.
With the blessing of the internet. The bad coil, the old oil pump drive, the old muffler, old oil pump gear. So this is just a box of parts that is probably just going to get scrapped unless there's something I can find. Actually, with the one thing... Huh?
Somebody wants it. Do you want these parts?
Does anybody want a wobbly crank pulley?
Just pay for shipping and you can have it.
Someone else was also kind enough to give me a cam gear, but this fiber one is just, it's toast. The whole center section wobbles, inside the fiber section.
It would make such a badass necklace, though.
It kind of would, wouldn't it?
Amazing.
Oh, yeah. Coil, what I'm going to do with this is pull it apart, get all the guts out of it, and run external wiring to get from the primary and secondary circuits so that I can modify the 8N at some point to take a standard automotive round can coil style ignition. Long term though, not happening right now. I'm just going to keep it on hand for some custom modification. So there were other parts that were replaced. Here's the last thing. I rebuilt the spindles and the bearings. Everything spins nice and smooth now. A lot of the time on the 8N really has been spent in fixing destroyed threads. I mean, my hands were sore from running a tap and die some days, where I would be doing it for hours on end just because the bolts were so nasty. A combination of lack of care in assembly and also just age. I mean, if you look, like, this is one of the last external things to go back on. I mean, these bolts, these used to be a carriage bolt, and you can see the head is so thin on them, it barely even has anything left to it anymore. So, it's just stuff that you run into on something that's, well, it's a 1950, so
it's a little bit older than you.
A little bit, not by much.
How are your carriage bolts? No.
They're fine. They haven't dropped yet, so
no.
We'll see. I think that about rounds it up. Here's, yeah, I mean, I could show you some more, like, bits and pieces, like the governor parts and the old ignition, but you get the gist. It leaks from several different locations that have to be fixed before I can really put it back together, and that's going to require some more parts. So, acquiring new parts, putting those parts in, hopefully in the next couple weeks I can hear it run again with a hood on it and a gas tank and actually be sitting in the seat driving it. We'll see. Thanks for watching. It's a shame it smokes so much, because it runs really, really well.
Well, now we have to cover him up and put him to bed. Well, her, right?
I'm starting to get attached, it's true. Finally starting to come to terms with it. I'm done being angry. Start being nice.
You're in acceptance now?
Yeah, I've accepted that it needs and wants more attention than I was initially prepared to give it. And this is why I can't flip vehicles or machinery for that matter. I'm not a flipper. I can't. Once I get this far into a project, I can't stop caring about the thing. In fact, caring is where it comes from, right? That's the whole reason that I do this stuff, is because I care about the machines and I think that they deserve to be treated well. And so once I get that attached, it's like forming a bond or like a relationship. So I'm not really the flipper kind. I can't take something and do a minimal amount of work to it and just turn it over to the next person, because it's just not who I am.
That's a relief.
Huh?
That's a relief for me.
Yeah. Otherwise, she'd be long gone by now.
I mean, you could probably use an upgrade.
Good. Thing's watered out. How did I do this? I think I've got like 8 different configurations of tying this thing down. I don't do the same thing twice. Oh shit, that's not it.
Because surely if you don't,
If I don't cover it, it will rain.
now that you have covered it,
It'll be dry for a couple months.
good night, Garage. Good night, 8N.
Huh?
Good night, 8N.
Night, little guy. Make sure. It's really easy to forget turning off the ignition. And apparently now I got to shut off the fuel too, because it's going to dump fuel into the car overnight.
Probably would have been easier to do.
No, I did do it before.
Just got
It's
checked.
just you get to that point where it's all covered up, and then you start second guessing yourself because you can't see it. I did. It's not like I had to do those things again. I was just double checking. So.
I don't know who would have caused you to start being so anxious about things.
Really?